Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to share another process for diving deep into a really creative and expansive self-exploration process. If you're new to my channel, if you are new to my way of working, welcome. The way that I think about how these processes kind of work is like a walk through the woods where we're just kind of going along, being really playful, really creative, and kind of seeing what emerges. And you'll see how that works in this practice today that I'm going to share. I'm going to walk through it. I call it the character field method. And for this, you really just need, I would suggest a tarot deck works best for this because the different types of suits in the tarot deck are going to kind of function as a kind of mechanic within this practice, as you'll see. And if you want to kind of follow along with your own deck, that's certainly fine. I'm just going to demonstrate how this would work. And with all of my practices, there isn't one specific way. It's very fluid and flexible. You can kind of think of this as just a suggestion. But the first step is to draw, if you're working with the tarot deck, draw the card as the visitor. And I am going to refer to this card as the energy that we're working with. But if you're working with a deck that has a lot of figures or very clear characters in it, you could also think of this card as a character that we're then going to kind of start to work with and explore. And so this is, I pulled the High Priestess. This is very obviously a figure or a character. So because it is so clearly an entity, I'm actually going to kind of switch and think about this as a character instead of an energy. If I was working with something that was a little bit more abstract, like in one of my previous videos, I worked with the river deck, which was very, very abstract. I might just think of it more of as an energy and even possibly let the form that energy takes, whether it's, a spirit, an animal, a human, something else, can kind of emerge through the exploratory process. But in any case, once we pull this card, now we kind of start to explore it in a much more embodied kind of a way. And that could be a whole spectrum. I'm just going to go through some prompts to kind of think about, if we were going to kind of bring this figure, this character to life. And so think about the character, or I'm going to think about this character entering a scene. So like what would this character do? So would this character speak very directly? Would they pause? Would they kind of add some playful commentary? Would they like step back a little bit and kind of be more observational? And so then if I was really working with this in this way, I would pull out my journal and I'd write, really, really quickly, very concrete, very physical observations about how this character would be embodied. So this character moves like whatever, the pace that they move, their tone or their voice, what their posture is, what, their eyes reveal, just something that's really concrete and physical about this character. So the next step is finding the scene, and there are a few ways to do this. So one is to have it, roll like a 6-sided die, and I have a list of different potential scenes. So I would just like roll my dice. It's a 2. I would go to my list. And for me and my list, the 2 is in my next work interaction. So that's using a dice. So that's one way. The other way is I really like, using my little metaphorical location card. So if I wanted to use this or some kind of a list of cards of specific locations, I could use this. Some of them are not entirely upside down, but that's okay for this. The point of no return, right? So that's a super like metaphorical, ambiguous, very depth-oriented location. And then there's also another way, and this is where the mechanics of the tarot deck come in. And so you could also, use your same tarot deck and just pull an additional card for the scene. And I have the suits, the different suits and the different majors function, they have specific purposes for this part. So I drew the 4 of Swords. So the 4 of Swords represents, it's a mental setting. So this is a scene that's kind of taking place internally, like if I'm using this, if I'm not using these other ones. And that's kind of more about maybe decision making or conflict or overthinking. These start to take on maybe inner parts of self or inner roles. So those are just kind of some ways to think about the scene, right? And so now if I'm in this like mental setting, I can think about, where does this character show up most strongly in that realm, in that context, right? So this is really kind of the location and the context, basically. Where might this character want to appear? What would the scene with this character in a more like internal setting be like? And now I'm going to kind of play around with this character in this scene in my mind, right? Thinking about when this character enters this scene, and you can even use some of the imagery in the card that you happen to be working with to kind of guide this exploration, right? So this looks like a figure, right? So maybe this is kind of like an inner scene, right? Part of my inner world. When this character, this is the central one that we're working with, enters into, again, this inner realm with this part of myself, it does what, right? What happens immediately? Maybe the atmosphere shifts in some way, because if this character takes over, what becomes too much, right? If there's too much of this character with this other one in this, inner scene, inner world, what is becoming too much? If this character disappears now, what's missing, right? So kind of playing around with how this character or this energy or whatever you've pulled is functioning within that context. And if you want to take it a little bit deeper, you can think about who in this scene benefits from the energy of this character or from this character. And maybe there's other, parts of self or other entities that are not like present right now. But this is really kind of keeping it very small and brief and contained, right? And then who feels threatened by this character, right? And so now we're kind of going through this very creative like exploration part. And then kind of bringing it now back into the personal. Where in my life does this character exist, right? So where specifically is this like inner scene or inner dynamic present in my personal life? Or maybe where does it not exist? Like maybe this is just kind of a fictional hypothetical that we're exploring, but where does it want to? Where does this character want to emerge, right? And so kind of thinking about real life experiences, maybe a conversation that was avoided, a creative idea that got stalled out, right? Inner voices, inner parts of self. And then again, kind of starting to bring it more personal and actionable is thinking about, okay, if I let 5% more or less of this energy, whatever makes sense, show up today, what would change? Would I speak more directly? Would I pause before replying? Would I step back a little? Would I be like slightly more strategic, slightly more visible? Like what could I actually do in a tangible, concrete way? So this is a pretty quick process. I would say probably like, no more than 10 minutes. And my whole process kind of goes from this like casting a wide net into being very like distanced and playful and fictional, and then kind of looking at that process and then kind of like bringing it back into the personal. So if you like this, please like my video, and then of course go ahead and hit subscribe to my channel for many, many more creative ways of using a variety of different tools from all kinds of realms to support creative self-exploration and personal growth.